Hello everyone and a very warm welcome to all of you for today's webinar. Hope all of you are doing well and keeping safe. So thank you for joining us today for this webinar on early career fellowships in basic biomedical science research. My name is Himashri and I am a senior executive in science communications at the DBT Wellcome Trust India Alliance, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. We also have in the backend our ECF team, the Early Career Fellowships team will be there along with our speakers. We are here today to learn more about the early career fellowships that we have started and the applications are open for that. But before we begin, let me first introduce you to the organization TBT Wellcome Trust India Alliance, or India Alliance as it is shortly known as. We are an independent, dynamic public charity that funds research in health and biomedical sciences in India. India Alliance invests in transformative ideas and supportive research ecosystems to advance discovery and innovation to improve health and well-being. It is being funded by the Department of Biotechnology, Government of India, and the Wellcome Trust UK. You can find more about our workshops, programs, and fellowships by visiting our website, indiaalliance.org. You can also follow us on social media through the handles that will display on the screen next. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few housekeeping pointers for your smooth experience. This webinar is being recorded. Highlights of today's webinar will be put on India Alliance YouTube channel. So if any of your friends or colleagues miss out on today's session, they can always look out for the recordings and the important bits. Also, please say that you will be able to leave any questions anytime during the webinar in the question box. Towards your right, you will see a question box as indicated in the picture here. And please make sure that the question only relates to the topics being covered in the webinar, mainly the particular fellowship we are talking about. If you want to comment on some aspects such as the inability to visualize, see the slides properly or hear the speaker, please type in the chat box below that. Also, in case the webinar ends abruptly due to a technical glitch, please join back using the same registration link that you have used to join right now. And please note that we'll keep the video and microphone of all of the attendees switched off during the event so that the speakers can go on uninterrupted. And once the question and answer session starts, we'll start unmuting you as you raise your hand and we'll guide you through the process towards the end. If you have any questions, of course, other than the fellowship related questions, if you have any issues in raising your hand or asking any question, please type in the chat box and we'll help you out. So now next, of course, we'll have a short feedback form after which you can fill out after the webinar and let us know if there are anything else that you would have liked to know. So next we move on to the agenda for today. As we have already started at 5, we are here at the opening remarks. Next, from our India Alliance grants team, Dr. Aritraa will give you an overview of early career fellowships, what it is and how its mandate. Then we'll have Professor Sandhya Koushika talking about the grant writing process and the entire grant writing as well as presenting process. We will have early career fellow Dr. Mahua Malik talking about her experience as an India Alliance early career fellow, and towards the end we'll open up for the question and answer session for all answering all your queries. So without further delay, let's move on to the first session for today. So session 1 is on India Alliance's Early Career Fellowship Scheme, which is currently accepting applications. This session will be taken by my colleague, Dr. Aritraa Lahiri. So let me introduce Aritraa briefly to all of you. Aritraa is passionate for translational science, and she has earned her dual MS PhD degree in biological sciences from the Indian Institute of Science Education and Research in Kolkata, where she worked on host pathogen interactions and vaccine development against infectious diseases. She was also the recipient of the prestigious Sitare Grandhian Young Technological Innovation Appreciation Award by DVT Birag and Shrishti during her PhD. She is currently a grants advisor at India Alliance, has been contributing towards our mission of building excellence and capacity in Indian sites. And she is the correct person to take you through the mandate of the ECF scheme, the provisions, key policies, and the process for the application. So, handing the platform over to you, Aritraa. Over to you.
Thank you, Himashri, and welcome all. Hope all of you are doing well. Just allow me a few seconds to upload my presentation, and in the meantime, I'll keep my video off because I'm facing some bandwidth issue. But please let me know if my screen is visible and if I'm audible to you all.
Sure. Your screen is visible.
Is it full screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, as I said, welcome everybody. And like Himashri mentioned, I will start with a brief introduction about our organization, that is the India Alliance. Established in 2008, the Deputy Wellcome Trust India Alliance, or India Alliance as we call it, is an independent, dynamic public charity that funds research in health and biomedical sciences in India. Funded jointly by the Department of Biotechnology, the Government of India and the Wellcome Trust, United Kingdom, India Alliance invests in transformative ideas and supportive research ecosystems to advance scientific discovery and innovation to improve health and well-being. And under the aegis of this mission of India Alliance, there are several fellowship and grant schemes, and the major fellowship schemes being for the basic biomedical research and clinical and public health research. The fellowships are again subcategorized as early career fellowship, the intermediate fellowship, and the senior fellowship. The early career fellowship basically aims to support young researchers freshly out of their PhD to undertake high quality research and establish themselves towards having an independent research career. The intermediate fellowships are for the researchers who are already independent and looking to establish or strengthen an independent research laboratory, and the senior fellowships are especially for the researchers who have already demonstrated their ability to lead independent research projects or groups, so that to help them expand and grow further. Now today we are here to discuss briefly on the currently open early career fellowship competition in basic biomedical research and run you through a few important aspects of the fellowship scheme. I will start with the key provisions of the scheme. That is, once awarded, the early career fellowship offers a 5 years fellowship tenure from the start date. A budget of maximum 1.7 crores, including the fellow's personal support, research expenses, additional costs such as travel and overseas allowance, the flexible funding allowance, that is contingency, etc. For this, please go through the costing policies clearly defined in our website to get an idea of the allowed and disallowed costs. The early career fellowship provides a personal salary support of up to 10.3 lakhs per annum for the awarded fellows. It has a provision to hire one support staff from the second year of fellowship, but the requirement has to be justified by the fellowship supervisor in his support letter during the full application stage. A subsistence allowance of $3,000 per month for maximum 2 years is provided for work outside host institution. And with this provision, one may choose to work in a lab outside or within India, but in one that is different from the host institute lab. And anytime during the 2 to 4 year, second or fourth year of the fellowship, the fellow must spend the first and majority of the last year of the fellowship at the chosen host institute lab. It also offers a travel allowance of 7.5 lakhs in total, and a contingency in terms of flexible funding allowance of 2.5 lakhs in total. And with all this, we request a time commitment of 100% of the working hours from our early career fellows who do not have a faculty position, and we expect at least a commitment of 90% of working hours from fellows with a faculty position. Also, no more than 2 hours per week of non-research activities such as teaching, etc., are allowed under such circumstances. And to avail all this, one has to cross 5 major stages in the competition. That is the preliminary application stage, which I hope most of you are experiencing right now. Once the preliminary applications will be received, the applications will undergo a rigorous internal triage, and few of them will be selected for submitting full applications. Please note that the submission of full application on the basis of invitation only. And in the full application stage, one has to prepare a more elaborative application, including the descriptive research proposal, a budget request, and other information. Once the full applications are received, they will then again undergo internal screening and will be forwarded to the international peer reviewers for their comments. And upon completion of the peer review process, the applications will be submitted to the selection committee for further shortlistings. The committee will score the applications and also will take the peer reviewers' ratings into consideration, and based on those scores, few of the applications will be selected for interview. The interviews again are exclusively through invitation. Similarly, the interviewees will be evaluated holistically by the entire selection committee, and few applicants will be recommended for an award. Throughout this process, there are 2 major policies that one must note, which are the resubmission policies. That is, if an application is not listed at the preliminary application stage, he or she may apply to the same scheme subject to meeting the eligibility criteria for the scheme. And resubmission in the same or junior scheme after consideration of the full application is not permitted in any of the fellowship scheme. That is, if the applications do not get selected in the preliminary stage and they get rejected at that stage, one can apply again to the same fellowship scheme. But once it is rejected from the shortlisting stage or in the full application stage, they will not be able to apply in the same or a junior scheme. And there is also the dual fellowship policy, that is, you may apply even if you already hold another fellowship. However, if awarded, one has to relinquish that fellowship, and they are not allowed to hold 2 fellowships simultaneously along with the India Alliance fellowship. Now that we are aware of the provisions and the competition stages, we will focus now on few important requirements of the competition, such as the eligibility criteria. And the major conditions would be that an applicant having more than 4 years of post-PhD research experience will not be considered eligible to apply for the scheme. That is, people with -1 to 4 years of post-PhD research experience are eligible, and people in the last year of the PhD program are also eligible to apply, and due consideration is given to periods when applicants have not been involved in any type of research activity, and such periods are subtracted out while calculating the post-PhD research experience. So it is important that one mentions non-research career break in their application, so that their research experiences can be calculated by the office accordingly. For example, suppose somebody has, after passing out of the PhD, has joined a administrative career or some other career. Please mention them as a career break if research has not been pursued during that period, and the amount of time will be subtracted out from the total period of research that will be projected by the applicant in the application, and the eligibility will be calculated likewise. Also, an applicant holding a PhD degree in any discipline of science is eligible to apply for the fellowship. However, the proposed idea must fall under the remit of the India Alliance. that is to support biomedical research which is relevant to human and animal welfare only. The third would be that the proposed host institute must be based in India, and it must also be a not-for-profit organization. And fourth, in line with the scheme's mandate to foster independence, the early career fellows are strongly encouraged to carry out their fellowship project or propose a fellowship project in a laboratory that is not their thesis laboratory or thesis environment, and under a fellowship supervisor who is not their PhD thesis supervisor or co-supervisor. If one has compelling reasons to continue in or return to the thesis laboratory or environment, strong justification has to be provided in the preliminary application for the same, and also the applicant has to arrange for a letter from the fellowship supervisor commenting on this decision. However, please remember all such cases will be evaluated case-to-case basis. Now, coming to the roles on the applications, in the previous slide, we have heard few terms such as the applicant, the fellowship supervisor, etc. And we will now get to know about the roles that the application demands. And so firstly, there is the lead applicant. He is the one who is applying for the fellowship. He also has to identify a suitable fellowship supervisor at the host institute who will be responsible for providing him lab space, resource support, and relevant scientific guidance as and when necessary. A letter of recommendation is also mandatory from a person. Actually, it is required from a supervisor or a person who is well acquainted with the applicant's career trajectory and aspirations, but he has to be someone who is different from the chosen fellowship supervisor. So at the preliminary application stage, we require support letters from at least the fellowship supervisor, as well another letter of recommendation from a person who is different from the fellowship supervisor. The next major role is the sponsor, who typically is an established senior researcher at the host institute, normally the head of the department or director of the host institute, and he must be in a position to guarantee space and resources to the applicant at the host institution or the department, and have the administrative authority to sign up to the India Alliance's grant conditions and policies. So the role of a sponsor is more of a administrative role, and the another role that an applicant must add in the full application is that of the mentor. It is a mandatory role for the early career fellowships and at the full application stage especially, and he or she is also required to provide a letter of support highlighting the mentoring plan for the applicant. He too should be different than the chosen fellowship supervisor. Also, the applicant can choose to add collaborators, as India Alliance supports interdisciplinary research, but this has also to be in the full application stage. However, one must remember that for all the roles added, letters of support must be provided by persons added for those roles for the application to be considered eligible. So to focus on the major requirements of the applications, so I have divided it in the two stages, that is the preliminary application stage and the full application stage. So in the preliminary application stage, one will require the applicant CV, the summary of the proposed research, which should be up to 750 words and not more than that, the letter of support from the proposed supervisor, and another letter of recommendation of a referee who is someone else than the fellowship supervisor. And please note that the applicant must provide every detail in their CV so that their eligibility can be calculated likewise. And for the full application, the major requirements is the full research proposal, which has to be up to 2,800 words, exceeding which the application will need to be revised. The second would be the budget. The details, also the details of the proposed host institution, the letter of support from the sponsor, because at this stage one has to identify the sponsor, mentor, external sponsor if any, and by external sponsor we mean the sponsor who will be supporting the applicant in their work outside host institution. That is the lab the applicant will be choosing for the work outside host institution. The PI of the lab will be regarded as the external sponsor. Also the letter of support from the collaborators and details of any human or animal experiments. Please remember that sample calculation, that is whether it be human sample or animal experiments, is considered very strictly by the India Alliance, and the number provided by the applicants during the full application stage and that will be mentioned in the award letter if awarded the fellowship can never be changed post award. So one must be very careful while providing the details, and it is advisable that the animal and a human sample numbers are calculated experiment wise and clearly presented. Also, India Alliance is very strict with ethical considerations, and while carrying out any experiment related to human samples or animals, one has to provide enough proof for ethical considerations that will be taken while pursuing such studies. Once all these requirements are fulfilled and one decides to apply for the fellowship scheme, please register yourself to the India Alliance's grant management system, that is the ISS. The applications are only accepted through the ISS portal and not considered if received as email attachment, etc. Please also note that each of the roles are required to provide letter of support can only do so through this online portal. Once their contact information will be added by the applicant, they will receive links from the portals that will navigate them through the next step to how to submit the letter of supports. Now I will summarize the salient features of the fellowship, which are, as you know, that the fellowship is very flexible and has a generous funding. A due regard is given to non-research career breaks, as I mentioned previously. Also, no restrictions are made on the basis of age or nationality, but the applicant has to apply to a host institute based in India and must possess interest to carry out the research in India and also to take that research forward in India only. The emphasis is majorly on the lead investigator, and continued feedback will be provided on your application in the form of review feedback, feedback from the committee, etc. No requirement for a salaried position or commitment towards a position, that is while applying for this fellowship. No mandatory, there is no mandate of any salaried position or commitment towards a position for the applicant. And encouragement is provided to pursue interdisciplinary research, and there is also opportunities to develop international collaborations through international peer reviews. As I mentioned previously, one can have a broader outlook on their research and can have an idea of the perspective of the well-established researchers in the field and can improve their work likewise. And also the fellowship application submission is through an online, secure and user-friendly application process to avoid any ambiguity. Finally, I will walk you through the tentative timelines set for the current round. The competition has already been launched on 19th August 2022, as we all know, and is open to accept applications till 2 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 16th September 2022. We are generally very strict with the submission deadlines, and submission will not be allowed post the prescribed timeline. Please also note that applications with incomplete information will not be considered for the competition. With this, I'm open to take a few questions if anybody is willing to ask something.
And there are a few questions, of course, up there in the question box. So I have around. Mostly the questions revolve around, the experience, how experience is counted, and also break. What are the breaks which are considered? Are they also considered because of lab closures or other delays?
As I mentioned, that experience is counted till 4 years of post PhD research, and if anybody has had any research break in terms of maternity or in terms of lab closure or in terms of movement from one continent to another, whatever be the reason, but the person has not provided or any productivity during a certain period in terms of research outcome, the person can, or the applicant can, put the period as a non-research career break, and that would be considered into calculating the post-PhD research tenure. I hope that clarifies.
I hope that is useful. I see a number of questions that specific questions that we'll take up towards the end. Now moving on to the next speaker for the day. Let me introduce our second session. Our second session is on grant writing, which will provide an insight into the perspective of grant reviewers and expectations from the selection committee. This is from the another perspective of the fellowships. So for this, we have with us Professor Sandhya Koushika, who is an ECF selection committee member. She is an assistant professor at the Department of Bioscience at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai, and Dr. Koushika has earned her BSc and MSc degrees from Maharaja Sayaji Rao University and received her PhD in cellular and molecular biology from the Brandeis University. Her postdoctoral training was at Washington University. Also, her broad area of study is the regulation of axonal transport within nerve cells. With this brief introduction to Dr. Koushika, I'll now hand over the screen to her to talk about her perspective and other ECF committee members' perspective on the fellowships. And I'll request Abdul to share the Dr. Koushika's slide. Over to you, Doctor.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. As soon as the slides come on, I'll start. Okay, can we go to the first slide? Thank you. Thank you. So welcome all. I see there are about 60 odd people here, and I hope this is useful. Please don't hesitate to ask questions. Some of your questions are not answered in the webinar. You can reach out to me. There is my solitary social media handle, and you can also find me online and find my email address. So we go to the next slide. So what goes into writing a good proposal? That's obviously a central feature of how you can be successful with this scheme. So here are the perspectives from the committee members. Choose excellent objectives. That is, questions that are important and exciting. Some of the problems could be relevant for India, for instance, in ecology or medicine, or cancer, where you're looking at Indian samples where very little information is known. Basic fundamental biology questions, all of these categories are fine. But pick good objectives. Typically, don't choose more than 3 or 4 objectives because you have to think about the time. It's just 4 years. So you don't want to propose too much, and it's great to be ambitious, but it's not so great to be over ambitious, because then you're not sort of thinking through your plan for how you're going to accomplish your objectives. In terms of your objectives, what's clear and relevant to include and sort of hint through your proposal or state upfront is why is it important and what answering these objectives will add to the field. As with any research proposal, it's nice to aim for the big picture and nice to aim for really what impact your research will create if successful. Make a nice balance. Make a balance of doable and risky. India Alliance as a scheme is not averse to risky projects, but you as an individual, as a scientist, need to succeed. So if you have objectives, all of which are very risky, you sort of fall into the danger of not having anything at the end of it. So I would say a good balance of what's doable and achievable and what is risky is a good balance to try and achieve. Experimental design and methods. Often the committee members sort of solicit more information here because sometimes the applicants do not write sufficient detail for the investigator, the reviewers to understand exactly how it will get carried out and what is the level of information that you need. And this often actually also comes up in the reviewers who review the grant. So as Aritraa pointed out, you will first have a set of reviewers who will review the grant, and those reviews along with your entire application package comes to the ECF committee, and people look at it. In fact, I read all of them, even though I might be the lead discussant only in a subset of them. So I sort of spend my time to try to read each of the grants to make sure that I understand it. And this is something that frequently comes up. There are questions about experimental designs and methods. So some detail is useful. It's a very delicate balance. And I think as you write it, it'll become clear. And as we move forward, I'll give you some tips as to how to think about clarity in presenting your grant. Preliminary data, if you have been in the lab or are from the lab already, is very nice to have. So there are two categories. One, you might have generated yourself if you've been in the lab already. So supposing you are 2 years into the lab and you're now just applying for the fellowship, then you may have some of your own data. And if you're a fresh PhD or trying a new angle which has not been done before, the lab might have some data. So having a little bit of preliminary data is a nice thing to have, not essential, but is a nice thing to have to convince reviewers about the merit of your grant. And if you have it, make sure it's included. Okay, that's the first set of suggestions that I have. So the second part is if you go to the next slide, please. What is very, very important that Aritraa has already covered, and it's good to reiterate this, especially as some of these cannot be changed after the grant has been awarded, is animal number, human samples. How do you get access to those samples? For instance, you're a basic biology researcher working with clinical samples. So your research idea is completely based on looking at a large fraction of clinical samples. Then you need to lay out where you're going to get your clinical samples from, how are you going to get access to it, how many do you need, what kind of informed consent you are going to take, what are your institutional IRB procedures. They don't have to be in the main proposal necessarily for each and every detail, but some of that information has to be in the main proposal and some of it will be provided in other places. Be very, very clear when you do these kinds of analysis or whole genome analysis as to what your data analysis pipeline is. What are you going to actually do with the information you get? And this is very, very important because this again speaks to methodology and speaks to rigor in the kind of analysis that you're going to, and convinces the committee that you have really thought about every step of the proposal. Things, for instance, like statistical tests, power calculations, and that is based on power calculations, you're deciding how many N's to go for if you're doing large animal studies or human studies. Very important to sort of elucidate that in your proposal. Sometimes if expertise is missing, and it may well be because that's part of what the ECF does, is you sort of learn expertise and ideas which you are not familiar with. If expertise is missing, list it clearly where you'll get it from, who are the people who are willing to help you develop it. Make sure that there are letters in place in the application which assures you access to samples, access to that kind of expertise. Make sure all of that is covered, because essentially what the committee will look at is to see if each of these things are there in place and you have the best chance of success with the ideas that you have and the goals you want to accomplish. Please reference appropriately reviews, but also recent primary papers, so that you have this nice balance of maybe some of the things are referenced by reviews, but some of it should be primary papers. Do not ignore any literature. Make sure that you actually include recent literature, even if it contradicts your ideas. Address it up front, saying that, here is a study, or here are a couple of studies which suggest the following, line of thought, have developed this following line of thought, but I think that something else is going on. These are my reasons. These are the kinds of preliminary data or prior studies which support this alternate point of view, and list that in your proposal, because that's very important, because it actually makes us as a committee recognize that you're a scholar and you're aware of the field and you have spent some time thinking through what you're going to accomplish and being able to place it in a larger context. Can you go to the next slide? So I've sort of given you some of the big picture, or the actually not big picture, the nitty gritty things about what you should do with writing a good proposal. One of the things which is really, really useful to consider is that your grant that you will submit for India Alliance is massive in size. If you've heard from anybody who's done it, and you'll probably hear from Mahua, it takes an incredibly long time to prepare, because it's just not your research proposal and the budget. And there are many, many parts which sort of explain what your trajectory is, what your interests are. For instance, they'll even have a little bit about, are you interested in science communication, or any, you can sort of list some of those things. And you need to take the time to fill all the parts, because all the parts are led. Because I think pretty much every person who engages with this process in the committee who looks at ECF is very, very serious, and they spend an enormous amount of time to read these, 60-page proposals, which has everything. It has the letters, it has the institutional review board information, and it has all these other components. So please spend time to fill that in thoughtfully, because that tells us a little bit about who the applicant is. Now, what's very, very important, and you should recognize that with any committee, we have a committee which is diverse with different expertise, and we all have access, unless we are excluded for the reviewers because there is some kind of conflict of interest, we have access to all the applications. So you are going to present your proposal to a group of people, not all of whom are going to be in your area of research. Therefore, when you prepare your proposal, I strongly urge you to get feedback from both people in the field and outside the field. And the things that you think about, is it readable? Is it clear? Is there a logical flow of ideas? If someone is outside your immediate field, can they still appreciate the importance of the question, what your proposal actually aims to achieve, how will it fill that gap? And by just reading the proposal, get some sense of where you are headed. It's all, so people outside your field should understand it, and people in your field should be able to read it and say, okay, yes, I agree. And these could be people in the lab, they could be other senior graduate students, they could be other mentors that you have which are in the field, and they should be able to say, okay, yeah, this is an important question, this person is addressing it well, and it's bound to give something interesting. It could be very exciting, it could be moderately exciting, but regardless, it's going to give very useful information, has the potential to make great impact. One thing which is very important, I'd like to sort of emphasize this, and this is for everybody. I think it applies as much for people who are more senior, who might have written something and want suggestions to someone who's just a beginning graduate student or an ECF proposal, please give enough time to people to give you thoughtful comments. And while you're preparing your application, please make sure that you give them that time and the time for you to take that feedback and make revisions, because that will really strengthen the way you present the proposal. And please give sufficient time to PI and collaborators to get their letters and supporting documents organized. And thoughtful letters often take a lot of time to write. So it is a good plan to sort of give people enough time to sort of think through what is it that they want to say and highlight your strengths. And that really helps to have a very nice and complete, thoughtfully prepared application. Can we go to the next? So here we'll cover PI and host institution, which is also very important part of your training, as well as a stepping stone to full independence, and that you will hope to gain through this fellowship. So it would be nice for you to articulate what you will gain from the PI and environment, and very important to have a plan for independence and have an understanding of how your work fits into the larger picture of the lab and the area. The PI, I'm sure, has thought about you and your proposal carefully, and the PI input is obviously very important for developing a good proposal. The host institution should have all the infrastructure that you require, and in general, both the lab and the institution matter for you to achieve the goals that you have proposed, right? So make sure that these components going in where you're going to write your proposal from, make sure that these are things that you have thought about, and somewhere in the proposal there might be places where you can write, what your path for independence is and how do you think you will proceed. So those are very good things to keep in mind. Can we go to the next slide? I think Aritraa has already covered this in depth. It is really nice if you can travel and collaborate. I think being exposed to different kinds of people and different kinds of looking at problems is very important, and it's nice if you can articulate that clearly in your proposal. So international collaboration can be either technique driven or problem driven. So for instance, you can say, I want to do this particular thing which we can't do in my host institution. I'm going to go to this other institution outside the country and get it done. Or you can say, I am doing this problem and this particular aspect I can do in my lab, but there are certain questions which I will much prefer getting intellectual and other kinds of input elsewhere, and I will do it there. So articulate that as to what that plan is, where you plan to go, and plan this well, including what meetings you're going to attend. Because I think having a listing of that, again, gives you a picture of a candidate who is on top of their game, and they are going to basically in a situation where we will see you flourish as an independent PI. The next slide, we can just very quickly go through because Aritraa covered it very well. There is some amount of flexible funding. Please recall that this is very generous funding, and typically you will have enough money to do everything you plan to do. If that is not the case, re-look at your objectives, discuss it with the PI of the lab, and try to shape that such that the money is going to be enough. Ask for what you need, but remember this takes place in the context of what is available. So you should know what is available. So typically, as I said, salary, JRF with justification, small equipment, consumables, paying for facilities. Many imaging facilities in India have slowly started to have charges associated with. Mass spec will have charges associated with this. Travel to meetings, meeting collaborators, all of that. So we can go to the next slide. I think these are probably extremely important for anybody who's here to sort of get a sense of what is striking about a successful applicant? Typically, a successful applicant has consistent productivity. So having a CV where you have consistent productivity, you're not talking about high profile papers, but consistent productivity throughout your trajectory up until that point is very helpful, because that means that the applicant has the ability to carry stories either collaboratively or by themselves to completion, be able to get that work published. So you don't have to worry as much about, I don't have high profile papers. What is much more important for the ECF is you have papers. So that kind of consistent productivity really helps. Good letters are always nice to see. And good letters, one of the things that people look for is the assessment not only of your productivity, but your independence thus far and your potential in the future. For the PI in whose lab you will be working, their buy-in and support for both the project and the person is very, very nice to see in a letter. So when we see that, we said, okay, this individual who has done well so far is now going to be situated in a good place. None of these things, consistent productivity, good letters, is a substitute for a good proposal. Okay, a good proposal is essential. So the combination that the committee looks at is person and project. If you have a very, very good person, then a project which is a little bit more risky may be viewed with, especially if the interview and all of that goes well, may be viewed with greater consideration. If the project is stellar but the person doesn't look very strong, then there is a lot of discussion in these kinds of cases. But that's why I'll always emphasize both the person and the project count. Can we go to the next slide? In the evaluation, the quality of the research proposal, feasibility, originality, expected advance, strengths and weaknesses, expertise to carry out, potential for independence, the trajectory so far, all of that matters. And the quality of research proposal, especially in terms of readability, clarity, and flow of ideas. So how does the first objective, what you find in the first objective, lead you to the second objective, lead you to the third objective? The applicant and the quality of grant writing, which is why I think you should invest sufficient time in writing the grant as clearly as possible and getting as much feedback as possible from both people inside and outside the field. Okay, we can go to the next slide. In the interview, when you reach up to the interview, if you get that far, you should know that each interview is unique. There are no set questions. Initially, the chair and co-chair will just sort of have some icebreaker questions and tell you how the interview will go, such that you have this very short talk, this is how much time you have, and we're very happy to see you, and if things are okay. And in your short talk, hit the highlights. And what are the highlights? What are you doing? Why are you doing it? How you're doing it? And what impact you hope to have, right? These are the 4 clear things that you should be able to cover in your short talk. What we are trying as a committee is to try to get to know you, and get to know your project. You will at that point already have got the reviews that other people have written and sent in by reading your grant, who are experts in the field. There may be lacunae that have been identified there. Your talk is the place where you acknowledge and respond to those lacunae. So include that in your talk briefly, because they might have identified certain weaknesses or may have questions, and those you should address. People will not always, the ECF committee, there are like 2 or 3 lead questioners. People will not always be in your area of research, but may generally follow that area because they are interested, it's close by, they just, they have read your proposal, they found it interesting. So it is very, very important that you have a wider understanding of your area and where your proposal fits in. And that, if it can also reflect in the written grant, it's usually just really, really helpful for you, because we know that you've thought about the larger picture, but also to the committee. One thing never go amiss: practice, practice, practice by yourself, to others, people in the field, people outside the field. Get people who can ask you a lot of questions to sit in your talk. It doesn't matter. Sometimes people will not mind sitting in for the fourth or fifth practice. Don't feel afraid to ask this, because that's when you will get a wide variety of questions, and you will also know if your talk hits the right pitches. Have you actually taken care of everything that you need to do? It really helps to present well thought of defense of your ideas. So if there are two contrasting views of your field, you can say that while that might be happening, I think this is equally important, it's under investigated, and these are the specific questions that we need to address, and these are the reasons why you need to address it. So I think that really helps if you can, as I said, come across as scholarly and someone who's engaged with the literature, engaged with the questions, and has thought through things. Can we go to the next slide? I already said this, that it responds to issues that reviewers have raised. I've often seen interviewers ask for clarifications and sometimes details. Please make sure that you recognize that many will be out of the field, so try to avoid jargon as much as possible. Proposals can, you might even get through and get the funding, but sometimes in the interview, and the best interviews are like scientific discussions, where you're just trying to understand what the other person wants to accomplish, how they plan to accomplish it, and it's just a nice discussion of ideas. And say, how could this be happening in this way, or have you thought about this particular angle? And sometimes those discussions can also have a very positive impact on how you are thinking about your science as well. So please recognize that the committee in the room are not your antagonistic. They have spent a lot of time on your proposal, and my suggestion to all of you is to have fun with it. You wrote it, you know it probably better than anybody else, including the committee members who may have read it. And just have fun with the science, have fun, and have that kind of discussion. There are a bunch of people who are investing time to discuss your science with you, and enjoy that process. And I think it can be a very, very enjoyable thing to have that. I come to my last slide, and the last slide is really something that which India Alliance insists, but I think it's a very important thing that you guys should do, whether you're successful in the ECF or not, is to develop a mentorship relationship with someone who you have, and they need not be the PI you work with, and they need not be the PhD supervisor you work with or your thesis committee member. So a good mentor can be valuable in many contexts, right? They need not be in your field of research. Pick a mentor whom you think you can discuss your science, career, and other issues freely. Build a relationship such that the above can be done. They may also be in a situation to give you scientific input, but they may also just be someone you can sound ideas of. Say that, I am thinking about taking this trajectory in my career, but I'm a little uncertain. And they give you that space to explore that in discussion with somebody else who's typically much ahead of you in the career and is not your immediate mentor. And that can be a very rewarding kind of relationship. So spend some time thinking about who would you like to be this kind of mentor, and make room for them in the application, and just don't think of it as just one other person, because a really good mentor can make a huge difference in making sure that you have feedback outside of your immediate context. And with that, I come to an end, and I'm happy to answer questions if I have not covered everything that you might want to actually know. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sandhya. It was wonderful to listen to you. You have pointed out many important things in a simple terms, and it was really nice to hear about from the other side of the table the thinking behind it and how to approach the interview committee. So I am sure the attendees have had a greater understanding of the application process itself, and thank you very much, and I'm sure they will have a lot of questions and for you. So I think in the interest of time, we'll move to the next session, and then in total we'll take all the questions together. So in the meantime, you can always browse through the questions. So for the next session, we have with us fellow who has already gone through this experience of India Alliance fellowship, Dr. Mahua Malik. Let me introduce her to you. She will speak to you about her experiences. So Dr. Malik was awarded the DBT Wellcome Trust India Alliance's Early Career Fellowship for the study of role of connection 47 in axon myelin interaction during the virus-induced demyelination of the central nervous system. She has done her MSc from the Banaras Hindu University and received her PhD from University of Alberta in Canada. She has published peer-reviewed research, impactful research in many national and international journals, and won several awards, including the DST SERB Award for Young Scientists. With this brief introduction, I will hand over the screen to Dr. Mahua for her presentation, her experiences and learnings from this process. Over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Himashri, for the brief introduction. I think I'm audible, and I believe my screen is visible and it's in the full screen mode.
Yes, you are clear, and also we can see the presentation.
Okay, great. So I have been an India Alliance Early Career Fellow since January 2019, and this is my 4th year in the fellowship program. And moreover, with this fellowship, I have recently moved to an independent research position, which has been a huge experience. So while Aritraa and Professor Sandhya have very nicely walked you through the application process and highlighted some of the key pointers in writing a good competitive proposal from the committee and the reviewer's perspective, I will share with you some of my experiences and some of the key things that I think are important for the application process, starting from the application to being an awardee and developing own research lab, which you probably will find to be useful for the application process and motivate you to put in the time and effort that is required to make a good ECF application. So first, why apply for this India Alliance Fellowship? So one of the main reasons to apply for this fellowship, I think, is the flexibility that it gives to the fellow, not only in terms of the science they do, but also how they do it. And I'll give you an example here. Like my proposed research, as Himashri already mentioned, is to investigate the role of certain intercellular communication proteins in chronic demyelination. And when I submitted the application at that time, I proposed to do this work using primary culture of glia and neuronal cells. But after I started the work, and with this the pandemic situation going on for the last 2 years, I realized that an in vivo mouse model will be a better approach and a more relevant model to address my proposed research objectives. So I shifted from using the primary culture to an in vivo model with some reasonable justifications. And so you know how it is a very flexible fellowship. It allows you to, it's flexible on how, it's not flexible not on the science, but on how you do the science. In addition to the flexibility, having an India Alliance Early Career Fellowship, I would say, gives you immense visibility in the scientific community, both nationally and internationally. And this by itself gives you a sense of accomplishment and certainly helps to build your confidence. Another feature of the IA fellowship, fellowship is the generous and extremely flexible funding. As you all know, IA fellowships come with a generous amount of funding. And the best part is, depending on your requirement and how your work is shaping up, you can always write to the IA team. And if your request is reasonably justified, they can reallocate the funds to whatever your needs are at that moment, so that your work can make a progress and it doesn't get stalled just because of lack of funds. Another important point that I would like to mention here is the timely release of funds. So the entire process of fund disbursement is very streamlined, and every year funds are released in a timely manner. So even during the difficult times that we had for the past 2 years, I would say that my work never got stalled for lack of funding. Also, there is a continuous feedback process throughout the application process and thereafter, which is really helpful because it helps you not only in writing the grant, but also helps you to defend the grant and face the interview panel. And even after you get the fellowship, you have the supervisors and the mentors who continuously provide you feedback and help you to stay on track with the project. In addition to that, there are annual review meetings and progress reports that need to be submitted on time, all of which give you a chance to do a proper self-assessment of your progress with the grant, and also lets you know if any course correction is required. And I think what stood out to be particularly important for me from this program is the rapport you build up with your supervisor and the selected mentors in this process, as Professor Sandhya mentioned. And this rapport actually helps you not only with this grant, but even beyond that in your future career path. Another great feature of the program is the networking opportunity it provides to the awardee. The flexibility that exists or that is built in this fellowship program. You can bring in new collaborators anytime during the program, and this is really helpful as it helps to shape the work or the research in a very productive way. Another valuable component of the fellowship I would like to mention is the work outside host institution. And I think this gives the awardee a great opportunity to go to a lab and get trained in some new techniques and get expertise relevant to the project that is not available in their host institution or with the current supervisor. And also it gives a good networking opportunity. Also, particularly for the homegrown researchers who have done PhD in India and never been abroad for a postdoc, it gives a chance to explore the scientific culture outside India. The best thing I liked about the IA fellowship is the seamless support from the IA team. There is a continuous guidance and support process right from the start of the application process to the initiation of the award, and even after that as you progress with your fellowship. And believe me, at no stage of my fellowship or the application process did I ever feel to be left out. If you have any queries or face any difficulties, you can always write to them, and they always get back to you with very helpful insights. I would say that starting from the entire IA team, starting from the grant manager to the grant advisors to the finance and the admin staff, all of them are really, really helpful, and it has been a wonderful experience working with them. So coming to the selection process, as already mentioned by Aritraa and highlighted by Professor Sandhya, there are multiple stages that includes preliminary application followed by full application and the final interview. Preliminary application is a short application and is the easiest part, I would say. And as already mentioned, it basically checks your eligibility for the fellowship. The full application is very exhaustive and requires a lot of time and planning. For me, it was a really engaging process, and I would say that it to be a very rigorous process compared to the other grant applications in India. As Professor Sandhya already mentioned, the full ECF application includes not only the research proposal and the budgeting, but then you also have to select the host institution, your supervisor and mentors, and you need to justify why do you select them specifically and how these individuals and the proposed host institution that you have selected can help you in executing your research proposal and also in your career growth. Then there is the WOHI part, the work outside host institution part, where you have to select the external sponsor who will host you in his or her lab and plan when during your fellowship you want to utilize that opportunity. And I would emphasize here that you need to think very carefully each of these aspects as all these associations that you're building up in this process can actually, if utilized properly, can actually help you in the long run, even beyond the tenure of the grant. And also, it's good to keep in mind that you would have to provide supporting letters from each of these members, which are very important and I think are critically evaluated during the review process. Another important aspect I felt that was very important while writing the full application were the feedbacks that I had received from my proposed supervisor and the mentors. And so writing the proposal was like back and forth between me and them. And in the process, it helped me to develop a good comprehensive proposal. And if you want to benefit from their comments, you need to actually give them time for their thoughtful feedbacks, and also keep time in hand to make necessary changes. Also, I remember that I did give my proposal to some of my friends and my colleagues who were not exactly from the field. And I think that helped me a lot in bringing out how the proposal was written and the clarity in that proposal. So basically what I want to highlight here is that submitting the full ECF application requires a lot of time and requires proper planning. And it is not something that can be done within a few days or a week. So it is extremely important to start early. Now coming to the interview, as we all know, India Alliance Early Career Fellowship is the most prestigious fellowship, both nationally and internationally, and hence it is highly competitive. So one needs to prepare well. Most of us, we feel very nervous when we hear of facing of an interview panel. I remember I was extremely nervous too. And I think that, that it is very natural, particularly when you know that you have only one chance and you very badly want it. But believe me, there is nothing to be nervous about. And if you can set that nervousness aside, you will actually enjoy the interview. For me, the experience was very, very unique. To start with, I was, as I said, I was very nervous, but I must say that the IA staff who were there to attend the potential fellows were very, very comforting, and they really helped me to calm down my nerves so that I can go in and present myself very well. And after I walked into the room, honestly, I found the panel to be very welcoming and friendly. And I would say that the interview was actually a very pleasant and a nice scientific discussion. What I felt was that interviewers were actually basically trying to see if I have thought well through the proposal, if I'm aware of the field, and if awarded, whether I'll be able to do the proposed work. They were basically rooting for me to see my potential, and I would say that at no point they were trying to intimidate me. So don't be nervous. So it was a great experience. But one thing I would like to emphasize though is that plan your talk well. It is a short talk and you need to finish in time, and they're very strict about the timing. So plan it ahead, and as Professor Sandhya has already mentioned, practice to others, because that helps a lot. I practiced to my friends both in and outside the field, and also another thing that helped me was trying to answer their questions as well. Since different people from both within and outside the field, they try to think about a proposal in different ways. I think answering all those questions really helped me in preparing for my final day, and with so many people interviewing me on that day. So another aspect that that helped me in preparing for the interview were the reviewers' comments. So as already mentioned, I think by Professor Sandhya, that the India Alliance actually sends you the comments that each of the reviewers have raised for your research proposal in advance of the interview. So it will, obviously it will not be the exact same questions that will be asked on the interview day, but I will say that by responding to the issues that the reviewers had raised actually helped me a lot to prepare for that day. Now, coming to my how does one feel to progress with an early career fellowship? So as I mentioned that this is my 4th year of my fellowship, and I truly feel that it has been a really valuable learning experience for me. All I would like to say here is that every stage of this fellowship program provided me with an opportunity to learn something and prepare myself for setting up an independent research lab in India. Right from the beginning, starting with the writing and defending the early career fellowship and then progressing with the award really helps you to evolve and develop the grantsmanship skills, which are very valuable skills required to pursue an independent research career in future. It also, the fellowship also helps you to develop mentoring skills in the fellowship program. And as you would know that there is a provision to hire technical assistant. And I had recruited one in my second year, and I tried to train her on the different laboratory skills and mentored her and in her career path, and in a way that actually taught me how to mentor students. And now that I have my own independent research lab, I think I know how to mentor young people who are just coming into research. So that actually helps. The other thing is the grant also helps one to develop very meticulous planning skills as to how within the stipulated timeline, in this case 5 years, you are going to plan your experiments, how to use the funds, where to spend it, and then there are the periodic progress reports and annual review meetings where you need to give timelines as to when you expect particular milestones to be reached, which actually helps or facilitates in self-assessment. Basically, all of this helps you to develop diverse skill set and gives you an immense scientific exposure, and I would say prepares you very well for an independent research career. Moreover, coming to the networking opportunities, it is in the mandates of IA where it actually emphasizes on building collaborations and networks, both of which are very fundamental to scientific research and academia. So starting with your selected supervisor, mentors, and collaborators, you can start building networks that can actually help you a long way down your research path. Again, as I've mentioned earlier, the best part I liked about this fellowship was the flexibility that exists in this program and the support that IA provides to its awardees at every stage of this fellowship. Altogether, for me, it has been a great experience. So I think the take-home message here is that the India Alliance Early Career Fellowship ultimately prepares you for the path towards independence. So to all the young researchers who really wish to set up an independent research career in India, I truly recommend to apply for this fellowship. So I think I'll end here. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to me, and good luck with your applications. And I'll be happy to take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahua, for taking us through your learnings, your experiences with this fellowship, and I hope it gives an understanding of what it entails. So now, with this session over, we will now move on to the question and answer session for the day. We have with us our esteemed speakers, and along with this, we have Dr. Devendra Singh and Dr. Devyani Samantarai from the grants team, Early Career Fellowship team at India Alliance. So I'll request all of you to answer the questions available there. So I see a hand up, so I'll try unmute and they can ask the question. Also, before I unmute, I request you all not to, disclose in detail your identity so that we can, have an impartial application process throughout. So just mention the information that is required to understand your question. So now I'll be unmuting the first speaker, Arvind. Please go ahead with your question.
Hello. So good evening, everyone. So my question is about the number of fellowship. How many number of fellowship every year, or is there any criteria?
Is there? I couldn't hear the second.
Number. How many numbers they provided means every year?
Dave, can you answer it?
Yeah, so Aditya, so I think this information is not basically we cannot disclose how many are there, but roughly around I can say that 10% of the applications are successful.
Okay. So thank you so much. So can I ask one small question next? So what is the deadline for calculation of the experience, post PhD experience, like end deadline of that date?
It should be, it's calculated from your PhD Viva date, or which is the defense date, till the full application deadline. So it should be 4 years of post PhD
Okay,
experience.
okay. Deadline of the full application. Okay.
Yes, deadline of the full application.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. That's it from my question.
Thank you. I'll unmute the next speaker. Next question, Prashali. Please go ahead and ask your question. Sorry. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, sorry. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yeah, so I have a couple of questions. So the first one is in continuation to the previous question. So the calculation is from your PhD Viva date to the full application submission deadline. Let's say the submission deadline is 20th December and my Viva was 10th December. So it's, like 10 days later. So is it strictly on a date, like literally date to date basis, or there's some flexibility of 2 days here and there?
We are strict about our eligibility, but yeah, few days, like 10 days, might not matter.
Okay.
But overall, 4 years is the maximum limit.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. My second question was, I've changed my field, my broad area of interest from my PhD to the current work that I do. How does that affect my application?
It doesn't affect your proposal. The proposal which you'll be submitting, if you have some experience in it, and the lab you're applying, if your fellowship supervisor has a good experience in it, then it's fine. It doesn't matter if you have changed your field.
Okay. Yeah.
Shall I add something, Devyani?
Yeah, sure.
In fact, changing fields can be a very good thing, right? Because it shows that you're able to make the switch, you're able to get new things done, and that can be viewed very positive. You should just make sure that you make the case to yourself that you can actually get the goals of what you're proposing done, right? Either through, you might switch system, or you might switch question, or you might switch both. So supposing you worked in a particular cell culture system, you may stay with that, in which case your technical skills may transfer over, but you may switch questions. Or you might say, I was working on this kind of question in this context, and I'm going to look at another context, and so your system changes. Or you might change both, and it really doesn't matter.
But my guess would be that you would be looking for, what I'm bringing to the table. I can't be like starting from zero, because I think that can be called in question as to how do I plan on accomplishing something that I have no background in.
No, that is not an issue at all.
Okay,
Because here's
that's
where the
really
quality of the applicant, that's where the quality of the applicant matters, right? So if we think that the applicant is excellent, has a good track record, has already shown, good markers of a pathway where you can see there's a pathway to independence, then we say, yeah, this applicant and proposal both are strong components and both are working.
Okay, yeah, perfect. If I may ask one last question. So you mentioned that publication record has an effect. So is there a minimum number of publications that you're looking for in the application?
No. We're just looking for consistent productivity.
Okay.
We are not looking for, there's no number like that.
Okay, perfect. Yeah,
And
that actually answers
somebody
everything.
might have had one person might have in their entire PhD one very high profile paper, and somebody else might have multiple papers which are not high profile, and both are good. right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you look at
Yeah.
the candidate as to what they have accomplished, and if there is consistent productivity with respect to, you know, who they are as people
Right,
and what they
right.
have done so far.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much.
We do have also a number of questions in the question box. So I'll just pick out one by one, and in between also we'll also keep taking questions from the those who have raised their hands. So the first question I see is probably this is for the ECF ECF team. What is the main difference between the clinical and public health scheme that India Alliance has and basic biomedical fellowship, other than eligibility qualification? Later also has clinical applications. Devyani or Dev, Aritraa, you can probably
Yeah,
explain
so
in terms of.
I take. So essentially, as you mentioned, that the major difference is between the qualification essentially, because this CPH category is catering to the physicians and the clinicians, the researchers who have this clinical degree or like the background of public health, for example. So obviously their proposals are normally in this area. Whereas this basic biomedical category is entirely different. This is for the PhD in the basic sciences, essentially. So they can have proposals which can go into clinical background, but I mean, mostly they will have basic sort of proposal. So the idea is essentially the background of the candidate, which will define. So, for example, a basic researcher will not be allowed to apply in a clinical and public health scheme until the proposal is really falling into that remit. So that way we make this differentiation. Otherwise, like minor differences are that the fellowship eligibility requirement is different there because we want to promote the clinician, physician scientist. So we have a large window there for all the different category of the fellowship. Whereas here we have much more discrete. There the amount of fellowship is also higher compared to here. So that is the broad difference. But right now, this is the applications are open only for the basic fellowship category.
Thank you, Dev. Then we move to the next question in line. Uh, are relevant articles on the proposal being submitted considered necessary? Will it still function if the relevant publications are at submission level?
Yes,
No.
of course, the committee do considers it, like if it is on the submission level, they will of course take a look. Like yes, Sandhya, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I will answer. So may I please say this is a hobby horse of mine, but I think also something that is well worth considering. Do not turn your back on bioarchive, because once you have a manuscript up there on bioarchive, the committee members can pull it out and take a quick look at it or in-depth look at it, depending on what they want to see, what you've already accomplished. So use that, but if that's the only manuscript you have, you know, is something which is under review and you don't have any other publication, that will give a tiny bit of pause, right? Because one wants to see something, but a bioarchive manuscript, totally on board. You know, people just look at it, don't worry about that. So try to use that method as well, because sometimes there is a lot of gap between when the paper goes out and gets finally accepted, and you might try 2-3 journals, and you know, you might have an absolutely hellish reviewer process. It could be, I wish for all of you that it's a very pleasant process, but you never know. So make sure if your mentor permits, then you use the bioarchive as a very good way to show that certain piece of work has been completed, even if it has not come out. And that would definitely sort of strengthen your application.
Thank you. So I think that answered the question. Now we have another interesting question. Can two students apply together for this fellowship? I think Divyani, you can answer.
No, so two people cannot apply together. So there will be like two people cannot apply together as a lead applicant. There's only one lead applicant in the proposal in the application. So apart from the lead applicant, there are other roles in the applications, but yeah, only lead applicant will be only one.
Thank you. So I hope that answered the question. Please remember that if you have more doubts, you can always write to us at our email ID and we'll answer you. I'll note the email ID in the chat box. Another question. How this is a common question that comes up in all of our sessions actually. A second. This is related to the mentorship that we have discussed earlier. So the question is, can a fellowship supervisor be a mentor? Again, second question. There is another question which talks about can a other party supervisor, can a PhD guide be my supervisor? So one is, can a fellowship supervisor be a mentor, and can a PhD guide be my supervisor? So, Dr. Sandhya, you also talked about mentorship. Probably you could start with.
So I will. So the mentor part of the application is typically envisaged as somebody different than your PhD and postdoc supervisor. I think I have seen one case where it was the PhD supervisor and the applicant made the case for why they were a good choice for them. Your postdoctoral supervisor is anyway your mentor. I would say that there is value. So one of the things, and I think Mahua mentioned it very nicely, is one of the things is very essential to when you make your pathway to independence is to actually make your own scientific network. And this gives you an opportunity to do that by picking a thoughtful mentor. The other thing which I think all of us are aware, when we work with someone closely, or PhD supervisor or postdoctoral supervisor, especially when you're on a pathway to independence, there can be tension, there can be discussions where both of you don't agree with particularly the scientific direction or when to send the paper out or how to pitch the story or what's a good time and what a good way to apply. This gives you, and think of it as in two things. One, it gives you somebody else who's a mature scientist, their perspective on the situation. And second, you are building your own scientific network. And that can be very, very, very nice. And that's something that you will continue to need to do throughout your career. So this is a good stepping stone to do that. Regarding doing your applying from the PhD lab for an independent project, which is still under the PhD supervisor, I think Aritraa actually talked about that. One would need to have extremely strong justification why that training environment continues to be the best one for you. One would say that if you want to do that, why are you not changing labs in the same institution and trying to do something different? Because this fellowship is not seen as an extension of the PhD doing the same thing, but really expecting you to take a pathway to independence. We are hoping, I think India Alliance is hoping that we are training and giving opportunities for some of the best people in the country to have the opportunity and funding to become independent as faculty members somewhere, as scientists and researchers, other places, it could be in academic space, it could be in the non-academic space, but that's the hope, and that is, I think, the reason behind saying that you can't probably, it's discouraged to stay in the same environment. Aritraa, did I, if I misspoke or something needs to be added, please do so.
I just like to add, there was the first part of the question about if the fellowship supervisor can be the mentor. So a fellowship supervisor cannot be the mentor. Yeah, Sandhya.
They are already your mentor, right?
Yeah.
In a sense, they are there. So
they cannot be again added as a mentor, as in the application. So
Thanks, Devyani, for clearing that up, and Dr. Sandhya also. Dr. Mahua, could you, give from your own experience about the mentorship and the supervisor? How did you go about it, and what are your tips for it? Any tips from for that?
Yeah, I think selecting the supervisor, like Professor Sandhya already mentioned, like how you select your mentor and supervisor is very important. So supervisor should be somebody, I feel, with whom you feel to be comfortable, very comfortable to work with, because you have to work for 5 years, right? So, and that's how you choose the host institution also. The host institution has to be very dynamic. It has to provide you a very dynamic environment, which will be very good for your career growth. So the host institution, the lab you select, your supervisor, all of this actually helps you in your career growth and your path to independence. The mentors can be, I think it's helpful to have them from the field because they are the experts in the field who can provide you valuable feedbacks about how to proceed with the grant. But not only that, mentors are very important on setting you in your independent path to research. So it is very important on how you select the supervisor and the mentors, and I think I'll bring in the collaborators also. And I mentioned that it's very flexible about India Alliance, that you can bring in collaborators at any moment you want, but you have to justify it. So all this actually helps to build your own network in India as well as abroad that will help you in your independent research. So
Thank
I think,
you.
yeah.
Yeah, you answered, the related points also. So thank you for that. In the meantime, I see many hands up. Also, may I request all of those? We have already, exceeded our time by 1 minute. So if you participants have other commitments, please go ahead, and we'll try to answer your questions in the through email. In the meantime, we'll take a few more questions, noticing the interest here. So I see a hand up. Another Priya Brata is there. So I'll unmute to ask the question. Please go ahead.
For this wonderful discussion, which helps us not for this fellowship but for other competitive grants applications. Thank you very much. I have a different technical question. Actually, I am working with the International Rice Research Institute, which have a branch in Varanasi. So it is a not-for-profit institute, but could I make it as a host institution, being an international research institute for this grant application? While part of my research work, which may be clinical, can be done with BHU, Varanasi, Banaras Hindu University. So these are the two technical questions that I wish to ask, because I am very much confused with that. Being an international non-profit institute, may I apply for this for here as a host institute? Thank you very much.
I can.
Hello. Am I audible or?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Your
we are
question
audible.
was, yeah. So Dev or Aritraa, would you like to take the questions, or Devyani?
I'm sorry, it broke for me the question in between. So if you can summarize it quickly.
Okay. Let me summarize it quickly. So I am working with International Rice Research Institute. It is a non-for-profit institute, but it has a research separate research unit in Varanasi in India. So am I eligible to apply from here, Varanasi, means in India, whether it is an international not-for-profit institute? That's the question. Thank you.
Yes, you can. So any institute which is based in India, which is not for profit, you can apply as the host institute.
Okay,
Thank
yeah,
And
my
you can do the
doubt was
clinical part.
as an international one only thing.
Come again?
No, my concern was it has an international tag, so it's a headquarter in Philippines. That's the problem. So I just want to clarify this thing.
Not an issue because you will be based in India, of course, in the institute at Varanasi, so it should be okay. But if you
Okay,
want, you can
thank
also
you very
fill
much.
in other details, and we can also respond to you if you have any other doubts. Basically, you can write to us on email as well.
Okay, I shall write to you. Thank you very much.
But the important thing I would say for you would be the remit of the proposal. That is something which you should look at because you're working on the RISE Research Institute. So that is something which needs to be looked at.
It is basically clinical, I mean, nutrition-based human research on particular rice, and there are something. So it is related to that on biomedical aspects and clinical aspects also. So maybe I will talk to Dr. Mahua later on NIBMG because I belong to Kalyani also. So I will talk to her later.
Sure.
Thank you. I can see Justin with hand up, so I'll unmute. Uh, Please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, madam. I have one question. My degree is in engineering. Both the BTech, MTech, and PhD degrees are in biomedical engineering. Is it only for people with a PhD degree in science, or whether engineering PhD degree holders are also eligible?
Any
No, you
field.
can.
The problem that you address should be related to biomedical things, questions. It can be very applied. It could be device builder, and that's perfectly fine too.
I have one more question. Whether an awardee of intermediate.
Fundamental topics are also fine. There was a question: is there a fundamental topic without any immediate biomedical? Yes, absolutely. In fact, I would say a large number of the proposals fall in fundamental research. This is asking somebody else had asked that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Whether an awardee of intermediate fellowship can act as the mentor of an early career fellow applicant.
Yeah.
Yes, an intermediate fellow, India Alliance intermediate fellow can act as your mentor.
All right. Thank you, madam.
Just to summarize, essentially, the mentorship requirement is such that your fellowship supervisor cannot be your mentor. Other than that, you can have mentor in India, in your institute, outside your institute, across the world, anywhere.
Thank you.
So another question we have is, should I include data related points in the preliminary stage, or the specifics can be added later in the full application?
I think there won't be any space in the preliminary application to add data. It's very short, if I recall right from what I have.
It's only 750 words.
750 word summary. So if you want to, I mean, it's up to you, but like this is just a summary, small snapshot of what you are proposing. That is what we are looking at here. And in full application, of course, you'll have a lot of space to write all this. But it is up to you how you want to present your proposal.
Thank you. Next, we have another quick question, which was already in part answered earlier. So I'll just mention it. Does the project proposal need to have an experiment component necessarily, or it could be completely theoretical, computational as well?
It can be anything. There doesn't need to be a experimental component. It's the problem that you want to address and how your objectives address that problem, and when you get results from that, how it will contribute to answering the question and what is the larger context in which your findings and your questions are situated. That's all.
So next is an important question that comes up again. This is how to find a sponsor. Would you like to start? Yeah.
Mahua, can you answer this? How do you find sponsor?
So I would say this is what you would, I mean, most people will find a lab or a mentor that they want to work with, right?
Right.
And once you do that, they are in an institution. So there'll be a department head or a director, and they automatically become a sponsor. So that's usually, I don't think one needs, I don't know of a case. There may be cases where one needs to sort of pick the sponsor. You have to pick the lab that and the mentor that you, I mean, when I say mentor, I meant fellowship supervisor that you want to work with.
Thank you. That I hope that answers. So next quick question is, if I have a permanent scientist position in India, whether I need a supervisor in that case, as I am having the lab space. Also, should the supervisor be from a related field as the topic of the grant project?
Yes, so you would still need a fellowship supervisor because ECF is basically a mentored fellowship program. So, and the fellowship supervisor needs to be from a related area so that he can, be able to guide you through your fellowship.
I think most of the questions have been answered. Any important question that you noticed
I
there?
would like to just add few questions we had received during the registration process. So there were few questions from MBBS and MD qualified people. So I would just like to say that this is the easier for the basic biomedical category. And if you're interested in the clinical and public health sciences, then you can apply for the early career fellowships scheme under the clinical and public health fellowships. And so the call for the applications under the clinical and public health, the CPH fellowships will be open in February of 2023, around that time. So whoever is like MBBS or MD qualified and your area of interest is clinical and public health, so please apply in that scheme, the early career scheme for CPH. And so we had three questions I would like to answer, quickly go through. So there was one that can a master students apply for the fellowship? So no, master students cannot apply under the basic biomedical category as our eligibility is PhD. But if you're looking for the CPH fellowships, so for CPH, we assess your eligibility based on the number of years of experience since the completion of your highest postgraduate medical and health degree. So for CPH, it's a bit different. And another question that we had is, can ECFs apply for SERB, CRG, ICMR ad hoc grants as sole PIs during the tenure of the fellowship? So early career fellowships, fellows who do not hold a faculty position are expected to spend all their time research work on India Alliance funded projects. So you are not allowed to commit time to other grants. But if you are holding a faculty position at the host institution, then you're allowed to hold other grants as PI, but provided that you would dedicate 90% of your research time on your India Alliance funded research, and it is expected that the additional grant you have or you have as a PI, it could be basically for the infrastructure or the equipment to support your research work, but nothing, yeah. And yeah, these were the two main questions. Another question is already answered. Yeah.
So we have already exceeded the time, but if there are any last minute thoughts from any of the panelists, please go ahead. So otherwise,
I have only one thing to say.
Yeah.
I have only one thing to say. I hope some of you are intending to apply. The ECF as a committee takes their work very seriously and are very enthusiastic about this scheme, and good luck. It's a lot of fun to prepare proposals because you get into it, and in fact I think I was one of the lead questioners for Mahua, and I still remember the scientific discussion when she was talking about CLIA. So it was several years ago now. So it can be a very enjoyable process, and not just sometimes one sort of thinks it's a stressful process, but it can be scientifically a very enjoyable process. So have fun.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you, all of our esteemed speakers for being with us today and explaining everything so in so much details. But even then, I know there are some questions that will come up. So please do not hesitate to write to us at info@itialliance.org. You can always go to our website and check out the email IDs and write to us.